In the heart of the vast Tessarian Empire, where shimmering towers pierced the violet skies, lay the once vibrant Queen Illyria. Her rule had been a golden age, marked by diplomacy and wisdom that expanded the empire's reach across star systems. But time, as it often does, had rendered her frail. An accident many years ago had left her paraplegic, and her people, so fixated on vigor and innovation, slowly turned their backs on her. Her court grew silent. The halls that once echoed with laughter and the sounds of lively debates now stood as tombs to a forgotten legacy. The Tessarian nobility, embarrassed by her condition, relegated her to a secluded chamber in the eastern wing of the palace. Over time, visits from family and advisors dwindled. Her aides were replaced by indifferent automata, and even her trusted companions found reasons to leave her side. Illyria spent her days by the great crystal window of her room, gazing out at the vibrant gardens she could no longer walk through. Her emerald eyes, dulled by years of neglect, held a mix of longing and despair. "This cannot be the end," she whispered one day, her voice cracking from disuse. "I am not a relic." One quiet evening, under the twin moons of Tessar, Queen Illyria made a decision. She wheeled herself to an old, dusty communication console, one of the few relics of her reign that hadn't been stripped away. The console flickered to life, its systems groaning in protest after years of disrepair. "This is Queen Illyria of the Tessarian Empire," she began, her voice trembling with both exhaustion and resolve. "I am alive, though many have forgotten. If there is anyone who can hear me, if there is anyone who still cares, I need help." Her message echoed into the void, carried by Tessarian frequencies rarely used in modern times. She doubted anyone would hear it, let alone respond. Yet, as the machine powered down, a small ember of hope burned in her chest. Across the galaxy, aboard the sleek human medical vessel Stellar Horizon, Dr. Jonas Fielding was reviewing patient files when his ship's communication array intercepted an unusual signal. The voice was faint, cracked by static, but its words struck him deeply. "I need help." Jonas frowned, replaying the message. The name Queen Illyria triggered faint memories from his studies, stories of a wise and powerful monarch who had faded from the galactic stage without explanation. His fingers hovered over the console as he triangulated the signal. "Lyra," he said to the ship's AI, "plot a course for Tessar." The AI's voice responded smoothly. "Tessar is classified as a high-security region. Entry without clearance may result in plot the course." Jonas interrupted, his tone firm. "Someone needs me." As the stellar horizon shifted its trajectory, Jonas felt a surge of determination. He didn't know what awaited him on Tessar, but one thing was clear. The voice in the void was worth answering. The stellar horizon emerged from hyperspace above the glowing jewel of Tessar. The planet shimmered with opulence, its golden towers rising like monuments to power and progress. From orbit, the sprawling cities seemed alive, their streets illuminated with the hum of advanced technology and bustling Tessarian life. Yet, to Dr. Jonas Fielding, the beauty was a veneer that belied the neglect he had heard in Queen Illyria's voice. "Lyra," Jonas said, leaning forward in the pilot's chair, "scan for a secure landing zone near the palace grounds." The AI responded swiftly. "The palace perimeter is heavily monitored. Unauthorized entry is likely to trigger a defensive response." Jonas smirked. "Let's hope they're not expecting company." As he navigated the stellar horizon toward the outskirts of the palace's massive gardens, Jonas felt a knot of anticipation in his chest. He knew he was taking a risk. Humans were rarely welcome in Tessarian high society, and uninvited visitors even less so. But the memory of Illyria's desperate plea pushed him forward. The ship touched down softly in a secluded grove, hidden beneath the canopy of crystalline trees. Jonas secured his medkit and activated the ship's cloaking system before stepping onto the lush ground. The air was thick with the sweet aroma of Tessarian flora, but Jonas had no time to admire the scenery. His destination was clear. The palace loomed ahead, a monolithic structure of gold and glass. As Jonas approached, he avoided the main gates, opting instead to scale a lesser-patrolled access point he had identified from orbit. Years of humanitarian missions in hostile territories had honed his skills, and he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had slipped past more advanced security systems than this. Inside, the grandeur of the palace was overwhelming. Every surface gleamed, and the hallways were lined with intricate murals depicting Tessarian victories and legacies. But as Jonas ventured deeper, the liveliness of the outer halls gave way to eerie silence. It was here, in the eastern wing, that he found her. The room was dimly lit, a stark contrast to the rest of the palace's grandeur. Queen Illyria sat by the large crystal window, her wheelchair angled to face the gardens beyond. Her once regal frame was gaunt, her silver hair cascading in unkempt waves down her shoulders. She turned at the sound of Jonas's footsteps, her emerald eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Who dares enter unannounced?" she demanded, her voice carrying a flicker of the authority she once wielded. Jonas stepped forward, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "My name is Dr. Jonas Fielding," he said calmly. "I received your message." For a moment, Illyria stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then her gaze softened, though her tone remained guarded. "A human. Of course, it would be a human who answers when my own people turn away." Jonas knelt beside her, opening his medkit. "I don't care about politics or borders. I care about you. You're not beyond help, and I intend to prove it." Illyria's lips quirked into a faint smile, though it was tinged with bitterness. "A bold statement. You may find me a challenge, Doctor." "I've faced challenges before," Jonas replied, his voice steady, "but I've never walked away from someone who needed me." Jonas began his assessment immediately. He ran a comprehensive scan of Illyria's condition, his handheld medical devices emitting soft whirs and clicks. The results confirmed what he had suspected. Years of neglect had exacerbated her paralysis, and her body was suffering from malnutrition and systemic degradation. But beneath the layers of damage, he saw resilience, a body that had been fighting to survive against all odds. "You've been strong for so long," he said, meeting her gaze. "But now, it's my turn to carry some of that weight." Illyria studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Do what you must." Jonas's work began in earnest. He adjusted her diet, introducing nutrient-dense supplements and fluids to stabilize her vitals. He applied advanced regenerative treatments to address her deteriorating muscles and tissues, using technology far superior to anything the Tessarian medics had bothered to employ. But his care went beyond the physical. Each day, he spoke to her, not as a queen, but as a person. He listened to her stories of the Empire's golden days, her rise to power, and the betrayal that had left her abandoned. He shared tales of his travels, his encounters with alien cultures, and the challenges he had faced as a human in a galaxy that often underestimated his species. "You're surprisingly empathetic for someone so young," Illyria remarked one evening as Jonas adjusted the settings on her neural stimulator. Jonas smiled. "Empathy doesn't come with age, Your Majesty. It comes from seeing the world for what it is and wanting to make it better." Her lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. Perhaps there is hope for humans after all. As the days turned into weeks, a bond began to form between them. Illyria's skepticism gave way to trust, and her spirit, dulled by years of isolation, started to flicker back to life. For the first time in years she felt seen, not as a burden, but as someone worth fighting for. One evening as they watched the twin moons rise above the gardens, Illyria turned to Jonas. "You've given me something I thought I had lost," she said softly. "And what's that?" he asked. "Hope," she replied, her voice steady. "Hope that I can still be more than what they left me to become." Jonas nodded, his resolve firm. "You're already more, Illyria. Now, let's show them." The transformation of Queen Illyria was slow but steady under Dr. Jonas Fielding's care. Her once frail body, weakened by years of neglect, began to respond to the treatments. Jonas employed cutting-edge human medical technology, neural stimulators to reawaken dormant pathways, advanced nutrient therapies to combat malnutrition, and rehabilitation devices to restore her strength. The Queen's room, once a dimly lit chamber of neglect, had become a hub of activity. Jonas's portable medical suite hummed with energy, and for the first time in years, laughter and conversation filled the air. "Hold this," Jonas instructed one afternoon, handing her a small resistance ball. Illyria looked at the device skeptically. "You expect me to regain my empire by squeezing a toy?" Jonas grinned. "Today it's a toy. Tomorrow it's a sword. Progress is incremental, Your Majesty." With a faint smile, Illyria gripped the ball, her fingers trembling but determined. "If I must start with this to reclaim my strength, so be it." Her resolve never wavered, even when the exercises left her exhausted. Each day brought small victories: a steadier grip, a longer session with the mobility device Jonas had designed, a spark of sensation in her legs. These milestones, though modest, were monumental for someone who had been written off as lost. But the physical recovery was only part of the battle. Illyria's greatest struggle was overcoming the emotional scars left by years of abandonment. Jonas, ever perceptive, knew that healing her spirit was just as important as healing her body. "You don't talk much about them," he said one evening as they sat by the large crystal window, the twin moons of Tizar casting their silver glow across the room. "Them?" she asked, her voice distant. "Your family? The court? The people who should have been here for you?" Illyria's expression hardened. "What is there to say? They abandoned me because I no longer fit their vision of strength. To them, I was a reminder of mortality, of imperfection. Easier to forget me than to confront their own fears." Jonas leaned forward, his gaze steady. "They may have forgotten, but the galaxy hasn't. You're still Queen Illyria, and when you're ready, we'll remind them." For a moment, her composure faltered, and her voice softened. "Why do you care so much, Jonas? You could have left me like the rest." He smiled gently. "Because no one deserves to be forgotten, least of all someone like you." As Illyria's strength grew, so did the whispers in the palace. Servants who had long avoided her wing now found excuses to pass by, their curiosity piqued by the human medic and the queen's visible improvement. Word spread quickly through the court, and soon the Tessarian nobility began to take notice. One afternoon, as Jonas guided Illyria through her mobility exercises, the door to her chamber burst open. Standing in the doorway was Lord Varkan, her nephew and a prominent figure in the royal council. His sharp features were etched with a mix of disbelief and irritation. "So, the rumors are true," Varkan said, his voice cold. "The forgotten queen has found herself a human pet." Jonas straightened, his tone calm but firm. "I'm her doctor, and I suggest you watch your tone." Varkan's eyes narrowed, his gaze shifting to Illyria. "Do you really think this changes anything, Aunt? You were exiled in all but name. Your time has passed." Illyria, seated but composed, met his gaze with newfound confidence. "My time passes only when I choose to let it." "And I did not summon you here, Varkan. State your business or leave." The nobleman hesitated, caught off guard by her sharp retort. "The council has concerns about the attention you're drawing. Your recovery is being seen as a challenge to the current order." Illyria smiled faintly, her voice dripping with irony. "How fragile that order must be if it's threatened by a paraplegic queen." Varkan scowled. "Tread carefully, Illyria. The council will not tolerate insubordination." As he turned to leave, Jonas spoke up. "You should know one thing, Lord Varkan. She's not alone anymore." The encounter with Varkan only solidified Illyria's resolve. "They fear what I represent," she told Jonas later. "Not because I'm a threat, but because I remind them of their failures." "Then let's give them a reason to fear," Jonas said with a grin. "You've come too far to stop now." Over the next weeks, Jonas and Illyria worked tirelessly to prepare for her next step, a public appearance. It would be her first in years, a chance to show the people of Tizar that their queen was not only alive but thriving. Jonas designed a sleek, adaptive exoskeleton that would allow her to stand with dignity, supported but independent. The night before the event, as they finalized the preparations, Illyria turned to Jonas. "What if they reject me again?" she asked quietly. "They won't," he said, his voice steady. "Because you're not the same woman they abandoned. You fought for this, Illyria. You've earned it." Her eyes softened, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. "Then let's remind them who I am." The day of Queen Illyria's public reemergence dawned beneath the twin suns of Tizar, their golden light cascading over the gleaming capital. The Grand Plaza, a sprawling expanse surrounded by towering crystal spires, was alive with murmurs and speculation. Nobles and commoners alike gathered, drawn by whispers of the Queen's miraculous recovery and the audacity of her decision to reappear. In the palace, Dr. Jonas Fielding helped Illyria prepare. She stood within the sleek, adaptive exoskeleton he had designed, a masterpiece of human engineering. The device, lightweight but sturdy, allowed her to stand tall with discreet mechanical support hidden beneath her flowing royal robes. "You're ready for this," Jonas said, his tone calm but resolute. He adjusted the final settings on the exoskeleton, his hand steady despite the gravity of the moment. Illyria studied herself in the mirror, her emerald eyes reflecting both determination and apprehension. "I've spent years being invisible," she murmured. "I don't know if I remember how to be seen." "You don't have to remember," Jonas replied. "Just be yourself. The rest will follow." As the palace gates opened, Illyria emerged, flanked by Jonas and a small contingent of loyal attendants. The crowd fell silent at the sight of her, their collective disbelief palpable. She moved slowly but steadily, the exoskeletons supporting her steps with seamless precision. Each movement was a declaration. The queen they had abandoned was not only alive but stronger than they had imagined. The silence broke into a wave of astonished murmurs, followed by scattered applause that grew into a crescendo. Illyria reached the center of the plaza where a platform had been erected for her address. Jonas stepped aside, his presence a quiet reassurance as she took her place before the gathered crowd. She raised a hand, and the noise subsided. Her voice, amplified by hidden speakers, rang out clear and strong. "My people," she began, her tone commanding yet warm, "I stand before you today not as the woman you once knew, but as the woman I have become." Her words hung in the air, a powerful reminder of her resilience. She spoke of her years in exile, of the neglect that had sought to erase her, and of the human who had seen her when no one else did. "Strength is not found in perfection," she said, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "It is found in the will to rise, again and again, no matter how many times we fall. I am here because I refuse to be forgotten, and I am here for all who feel unseen." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the plaza. Illyria's words struck a chord, her vulnerability and honesty resonating with the people in a way no royal decree ever had. While the crowd celebrated Illyria's return, the royal court seethed. Nobles and council members gathered in the opulent throne room, their whispered conversations laced with fear and anger. Lord Varkan, her ambitious nephew, paced the room, his expression dark. "This spectacle undermines everything we've built," Varkan hissed. "The people see her as a symbol now, a challenge to our authority." One council member, older and more measured, spoke up. "Perhaps we underestimated her. This could be an opportunity to unify the people." Varkan slammed a hand on the table. "Unify? She's a relic. And that human, he's manipulating her for his own gain." Before the debate could continue, the doors to the throne room swung open. Illyria entered, supported by her exoskeleton but standing tall, with Jonas at her side. The court fell silent, their shock at her presence palpable. "I see you've wasted no time plotting against me," Illyria said, her voice sharp. "Some things never change." Varkan stepped forward, his tone dripping with feigned civility. "Aunt, we were merely discussing the implications of your return." "The implications are simple," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "I am still queen, and I intend to fulfill my duties." The court erupted into a cacophony of protests and objections. Jonas stepped forward, his calm demeanor a counterpoint to the chaos. "You all speak of implications and authority," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "But none of you were there when she was abandoned. None of you cared. And now, you have the audacity to question her strength?" The room fell silent again, the nobles exchanging uneasy glances. Illyria took the opportunity to press her point. Taysar does not need rulers who cling to power out of fear. It needs leaders who are willing to serve. If you cannot be those leaders, then step aside. The confrontation marked a turning point. While some nobles, including Varkan, continued to resist, others began to align themselves with Illyria, recognizing the shift in public sentiment. The queen's appearance had ignited a movement among the people, who now saw her as a beacon of hope and resilience. In the days that followed, Illyria and Jonas worked tirelessly to solidify her position. They held meetings with allies, crafted policies to address the neglect of marginalized citizens, and began rebuilding the trust between the throne and the people. One evening, as they reviewed plans for a new initiative, Illyria turned to Jonas. "You've done more for me than I could have ever asked," she said, her voice soft. "But why? Why go to such lengths for someone you didn't even know?" Jonas met her gaze, his expression earnest. "Because no one deserves to be forgotten, Illyria, and because I saw in you what they couldn't, a strength that could change everything." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she smiled. "Together, then. We'll change it together." Jonas nodded, his resolve matching hers. The queen who had been abandoned was now leading a movement that would reshape Tisar, and by her side stood the human who had dared to see her worth. Together, they were unstoppable. The day had arrived for Queen Illyria's public return. The grand plaza of Tisar, with its gleaming crystal towers and vibrant gardens, was filled with citizens and nobility. News of the queen's recovery, though met with skepticism by some, had ignited a spark of curiosity and intrigue across the empire. In the royal council chambers overlooking the plaza, Lord Varkan stood with his allies, watching the crowd grow restless. "She thinks this spectacle will change anything," he sneered. "The people might cheer for a moment, but they will never rally behind a broken queen." Another counselor leaned in. "And yet, the crowd is larger than for any of our events in years." Varkan's expression darkened as a hush fell over the plaza. The massive doors leading to the royal platform opened slowly, revealing a figure bathed in sunlight. Supported by an elegant, human-designed exoskeleton, Queen Illyria stepped forward with Dr. Jonas Fielding at her side. The crowd gasped. Illyria, dressed in regal Tisarian silks and adorned with a crown that seemed to glimmer with her defiance, held her head high. Her every movement was deliberate, her posture unwavering. It was as if she had never left the throne. The silence gave way to whispers, then murmurs, and finally, a thunderous cheer. The people of Tisar, once indifferent to her plight, now roared with approval. Illyria raised her hand and the plaza fell silent again. "My people," she began, her voice carrying across the plaza, amplified not by technology, but by sheer presence. "I stand before you today, not as the queen who was abandoned, but as the queen who refused to be forgotten." Her words cut through the air like a blade, and the crowd erupted into applause. In the council chamber above, Varkan clenched his fists. Illyria continued her speech, recounting her journey of survival and the years of neglect she had endured. "I was cast aside because I no longer fit the image of strength this empire clings to. But strength is not the absence of weakness. It is the will to rise despite it." She turned, gesturing to Jonas. "This man, a human from a distant world, answered my call when no one else would. He reminded me of my worth and showed me that compassion and resilience are the true measures of leadership." Jonas gave a small nod, stepping back to let Illyria command the stage. The crowd's cheers grew louder, their admiration for both the queen and her human savior evident. From the council chamber, Varkan could take no more. He stormed down to the plaza, flanked by a handful of loyal guards. As Illyria descended the platform, he confronted her. "This charade has gone on long enough," Varkan spat. "You think you can waltz back into power with the help of a human? The council will never allow it." Illyria met his glare with calm defiance. "The council answers to the people, Varkan, and today the people have spoken." Before he could respond, the crowd began chanting her name. Varkan's fury turned to panic as he realized his control was slipping. Illyria's return was no longer just a spectacle, it was a movement. The days following Illyria's return were a whirlwind of activity. The palace, once a place of isolation and neglect, now bustled with energy. Messages of support poured in from across the empire, and factions within the council began to shift their allegiance back to the queen. In the royal chamber, Illyria and Jonas reviewed the latest reports. "The council is divided," Jonas noted. "Varkan still has allies, but more are siding with you. They see what the people see. A leader who endured." Illyria nodded, her expression thoughtful. "But endurance alone won't rebuild trust. I must show them that I'm more than a survivor. I'm a ruler." Jonas leaned forward, his voice steady. "Then let's start by addressing the systems that allowed them to cast you aside. Show them what leadership truly means." That evening, Illyria called an emergency council meeting. The grand hall was packed, every seat filled with advisors, nobles, and military leaders. Varkan sat near the head of the table, his glare fixed on her as she entered. "I called this meeting to announce my intention to reclaim the throne," Illyria declared, her voice steady. "Not as a figurehead, but as a queen who will lead this empire into a new era." Varkan rose, his tone mocking. "And what makes you think we will allow that? You have no power here." Illyria stepped forward, her emerald eyes blazing. "I have the power of survival, the power of the people, and the power to expose the corruption that allowed this council to abandon me." The room fell silent. Varkan's face paled as she continued, recounting years of mismanagement and neglect under his influence. Your days of exploiting this empire are over, Varkan. Jonas, standing at her side, added, The people deserve leaders who serve them, not themselves. Illyria has proven she's willing to fight for that. The council erupted into debate, but it was clear the tide was turning. By the end of the meeting, several key members had pledged their loyalty to Illyria. Varkan, cornered and outnumbered, stormed out in defeat. In the following weeks, Illyria worked tirelessly to implement reforms. With Jonas's help, she established programs to support the marginalized and ensure that no one, regardless of status or ability, was ever abandoned again. Her exoskeleton became a symbol of her resilience, a reminder that strength came in many forms. As the empire flourished under her renewed leadership, Illyria found herself reflecting on her journey. One evening, as she and Jonas walked through the palace gardens, she turned to him. You've given me more than my life back, Jonas, she said softly. You've given me purpose. He smiled, and you've shown me that even the smallest act of kindness can change the course of an empire. She reached for his hand, her voice steady. Stay with me, Jonas, not as my medic but as my partner. Jonas's eyes met hers, and he nodded. Always, together, they rebuilt the Tessarian Empire, proving that even in the face of abandonment and adversity, compassion and resilience could light the way to a brighter future.